Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. The paint roller was still dripping when the first police car pulled up, then the second, then the third. I wiped my brow, half expecting a SWAT team to pour out next. Instead, the officer stepped out, looking as confused as I felt. Across the street, Mr. Callahan, the smug HOA president, was waving his arms like he was directing traffic. There, that's the man. He's defacing HOA property. Arrest him. I blinked, staring at the half-painted front of my house. My house was, is this guy serious? The officers glanced at each other, then at me. One of them, a grizzled cop with the look of a man who had seen too much paperwork in his life, let out a sigh. Sir, do you live here? Yeah, I said, gesturing to the open garage where my boxes were still stacked from a move. I own this place. What's the issue? He's painting his house in an unauthorized color. Callahan snapped, marching toward us like he was about to issue a royal decree. This is a clear violation of HOA regulations. I demand you make him stop immediately. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. Sir, painting your own house isn't a crime. Callahan's face turned red. It's a violation of community standards. The HOA has strict guidelines. If we let one homeowner paint whatever they want, next thing you know, this place will look like a circus. I bit back a laugh. It's light gray, not exactly clown colors. Callahan wasn't listening. If he won't stop, then fine him. Seize his equipment. Evict him if necessary. The cops exchanged a look, clearly wondering if they could file HOA drama under actual emergencies. The officer shook his head. This is a civil matter. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA board. Oh, don't worry. Callahan sneered, jabbing a finger at me. I will. The cops left, likely off to deal with an actual crime, but I knew this wasn't over. Callahan gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind that promised trouble. I was still holding the paint roller when my neighbor, an elderly woman in a floral dress, shuffled up beside me. Oh dear, she murmured, you've poked the bear. I smirked. Looks more like an angry chihuahua to me. She gave me a pitying look. You don't understand. Callahan doesn't lose. Ever. I shrugged. Well, maybe it's time he did. The next morning, the first fine arrived, a $500 violation for unauthorized home modifications. I barely had time to laugh before another notice showed up. Trash violation, $100. Apparently, my garbage cans weren't exactly 12 inches from the curb. Then came the grass length warning. My lawn was 2 millimeters too long. I was starting to think Callahan had a dedicated ruin this guy's life department in the HOA. But the real kicker? My water suddenly shut off. I checked with the city. No issues on their end. When I called the HOA office, I got a smug response from a receptionist. Your water bill wasn't paid through the HOA system, she said sweetly. You'll need to bring your account into good standing first. Good standing? I'd been here 2 weeks. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my house color. This was personal. Fine if Callahan. I was sitting at a police cruiser parked down the street, just watching my house. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then, around 10 p.m., another cop car showed up. This time, an officer actually got out and knocked on my door. Sir, we received a report of suspicious activity at this residence, he said. I blinked. Suspicious. The officer sighed. Your HOA president reported possible illegal modifications to the property. I almost laughed. Illegal modifications? I was repainting my damn house. I explained everything, and to the cop's credit, he seemed just as frustrated as I was. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. This isn't the first time we've been called out to this neighborhood over nonsense HOA complaints, but Callahan has connections. I frowned. Connections? The officer shifted uncomfortably. The HOA has some sway with local government. They fund certain projects. I'm just saying, watch your back. Great. Not only was Callahan a dictator, but he was a well-connected one. The police left, but I knew this wouldn't be the last time they were weaponized against me. The water crisis. The next morning, I went to take a shower, and nothing came out of the faucet. No water, no explanation. I checked my bills. Everything was paid. So, I called the water company. Their response? Your service has been temporarily suspended by the HOA for noncompliance. I nearly broke my phone. Callahan again. I stormed over to the HOA office, pushing through the doors like a man on a mission. The receptionist, a young woman who looked both bored and terrified to be working there, gave me a nervous smile. "Mr. Callahan isn't in right now," she said quickly. I leaned on the counter. "Then tell me why my water is off." She hesitated before sliding a form toward me. "A reinstatement request. Your water can be restored once you acknowledge the violations and agree to the HOA's corrective measures." I skimmed the form. Admit to violating HOA guidelines. Agree to pay all fines. Obtain future HOA approval before making any changes to the property. Basically, sign away my rights or stay waterless. I exhaled slowly. "Let me guess, Callahan's idea?" The receptionist gave a small, guilty nod. I took the form, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the trash. "Tell him I said go to hell." The final straw. My car gets towed again. I returned home fuming, but just as I pulled into my driveway, a tow truck was already there. My car was hooked up and being hauled away. I ran over. "What the hell?" "I just got it back." The driver, barely glancing at me, handed me another ticket. "Repeat parking violation. HOA Rule 47B. No parking on driveways for more than 6 consecutive hours." I stared at him. "That's not a real rule." He smirked. "It is now." I turned toward Callahan's house. The smug bastard was standing on his porch, watching with his arms crossed, sipping his stupid coffee. Again, I could almost hear his voice in my head. "Maybe you should learn how things work around here." I took a deep breath. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about my house color. This was a power play. Callahan thought he'd already won, but he had no idea who he was messing with. While he was playing dirty HOA politics, I was about to play something much bigger. When I was done, he wouldn't just lose the HOA. He'd lose everything. The second time my car got towed, I knew I was dealing with a full-blown dictatorship. Callahan wasn't just enforcing HOA rules. He was using them as weapons. I'd seen power-hungry people before, but this guy was running the neighborhood like his personal fiefdom. But what Callahan didn't know, what no one in this HOA had even considered, was that I had resources, connections, and most importantly, the patience to play the long game. I wasn't just some random homeowner. I was a businessman, and in business, the best revenge isn't personal, it's financial. Digging into the HOA's secrets that night after my car was towed for the second time, I sat down at my desk, cracked my knuckles, and got to work. I started by pulling public records on the HOA's finances. Most people don't realize that HOAs, despite their oppressive nature, are still business entities, and like any business, they leave behind a paper trail. It didn't take long to find the cracks. The HOA wasn't just in debt. It was on the verge of collapse. Tens of thousands owed in unpaid contractor fees, a lawsuit pending over mismanaged funds, and the HOA's reserve fund was nearly empty. But the real kicker? The HOA had taken out a massive loan from a real estate investment firm, a firm I had a stake in. The moment everything changed. The next morning, I made some calls. By noon, I had confirmation. I now own the majority of the HOA's debt, which meant I controlled the future of this entire neighborhood. Now, I could have gone straight to Callahan's house and rubbed it in his smug face. I could have waltzed into the HOA office, slammed the paperwork on the desk, and declared myself the new king. But where's the fun in that? Instead, I waited. I let Callahan dig his own grave. At the HOA's emergency meeting 2 days later, I got an official notice from the HOA. Callahan had scheduled an emergency meeting. The topic? Addressing an unruly homeowner. Gee, I wonder who that could be about. I showed up to the meeting in the HOA clubhouse, where about 20 residents sat in metal folding chairs, looking half bored and half afraid. At the front, Callahan stood behind a podium, beaming like a dictator about to pass a new law. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "our community thrives because of our rules, and yet we have one homeowner who refuses to comply. Someone who thinks they're above our laws." He looked right at me. I gave him a little wave. "Mr. Moore," he continued, "has ignored multiple violation notices, disrupted the peace, and actively worked against this community's best interests. Effective immediately, I propose that we fine him an additional $5,000 and, if necessary, begin foreclosure proceedings. Murmurs rippled through the room. Even Callahan's usual bootlickers looked a little uneasy. One man hesitantly raised his hand. "Do that." Callahan nodded smugly. "Our bylaws allow us to foreclose on any homeowner who accumulates excessive unpaid fines. If he refuses to comply, we have legal grounds to seize his property." I chuckled loudly. Callahan frowned. "Is something funny, Mr. Carter?" "Oh, just all of this." I gestured around the room. "You standing up there pretending like you still have any power." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "I do have power. I am the elected president of this HOA, and I have the full backing of our—" I pulled a thick stack of papers from my bag and dropped them onto the table with a satisfying thud. "Not anymore." Dropping the bomb, I leaned forward, savoring the moment. "See, Callahan, I did a little digging. Turns out this HOA isn't doing too hot financially. Your budget is a mess, your funds are mismanaged, and worst of all," I tapped the paperwork, "the HOA owes a hell of a lot of money to a certain real estate firm." Callahan's face paled. I smiled. "And as of yesterday, I own that debt." Silence. Then someone in the back let out a choked laugh. Callahan forced a smile, but I could see the panic creeping in. "That's impossible. You can't just—" "Oh, but I can, and I did. Which means, technically speaking—" I turned to the crowd. "I own this HOA." Gasps. Whispers. A woman audibly said, "Oh my God." I turned back to Callahan, savoring the sheer terror on his face. "Now let's talk about your violations, Callahan. You get a taste of your own medicine." I pulled out a second stack of papers. "See, while you were busy fining me for nonsense, I started looking into your record. I started reading out loud. Misuse of HOA funds. $1,100 spent on travel expenses. Illegally hiring an unlicensed contractor. Violating HOA property rules. Your own fence is 2 inches too high." Callahan's jaw clenched. "This is ridiculous." "Oh, and my personal favorite," I smirked. "Parking violations. Seems like you've been leaving your car out overnight, every night." The crowd started laughing. Callahan slammed his hands on the table. "You can't do this." I shrugged. "Actually, I can. And as the new majority stakeholder, my first order of business." I turned to the residents. "Callahan is officially removed as HOA president." The room erupted. Some people cheered, others clapped. One guy actually stood up and fist-pumped the air. Callahan looked around, waiting for someone to come to his defense. No one did, because at the end of the day, everyone hated him. And just like that, his reign was over. The aftermath. As I walked out of the clubhouse, Callahan rushed after me. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "This isn't over." I turned to him. "Oh, it definitely is." He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. "You don't understand. I built this HOA. I made the rules. You're just some guy who bought his way in." I leaned in. "Exactly. And now I own you." Callahan stood there seething as I walked away. I didn't even need to turn around and know he was already thinking about packing his bags, because the real fun was just getting started. Callahan was silent for the first time since I had met him. The smugness, the arrogance, the iron grip he held over the neighborhood, it was all gone in an instant. He had built his little kingdom on fear, on rules meant to control, not protect, and now his empire was crumbling right before his eyes. But I wasn't done yet, because Callahan wasn't just going to lose his title. He was going to lose everything. The HOA's big meeting turned into a public trial. The next day, I called for a full HOA board meeting. The same people who once cowered under Callahan's rule now showed up eager to watch him burn. Callahan, to his credit, still tried to act like he was in charge. He strode into the room like he still had some level of authority, sneering at me as if this was just a minor setback. But then I pulled out a projector, and that's when the real fun began, exposing the corruption. I clicked the remote, and the screen behind me lit up. The first slide, a detailed breakdown of the HOA's financial statements. $110,000 in travel expenses to a 5-star resort. $115,000 in consulting fees paid to Callahan's brother-in-law. $20,000 budgeted for community improvements, but never spent. The room gasped. Some people started whispering. A few were outright furious. I turned to Callahan. Would you care to explain why HOA funds were used to book a resort in the Bahamas? His face twitched. I was scouting potential investment properties for the HOA. I clicked to the next slide. A picture of Callahan poolside, holding a drink with a caption that read, "Vacation mode on." Someone in the back laughed out loud. Callahan's face turned red. This is taken out of context. Oh, don't worry, I said, clicking again. There's plenty of context. I flipped through emails, invoices, and bank statements, each one proving that Callahan had been siphoning money from homeowners for years. I turned to the room. Your HOA president has been robbing you blind. He's been fining you for imaginary violations while using your money for personal luxuries. Shouts filled the room. This is theft. We've been paying into this for nothing. He fined me for my mailbox being the wrong shade of white, but he's out here stealing. I raised a hand. I'd like to propose a vote. Effective immediately, Callahan is not just removed as HOA president. He's also banned from holding any future HOA positions. It wasn't even a debate. The vote was unanimous. And just like that, Callahan lost everything. The HOA strikes back. Callahan stood there shaking. For years, he had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist, and now he was powerless. But I still wasn't finished. I turned to the crowd. There's one more matter to address. What happens to Callahan now? A woman stood up. He should pay back every dime he stole. A man next to her nodded. And all those ridiculous fines he made us pay. He should have to pay them back too. I smirked. I agree. And since I now control the HOA's financial records, I have full access to Callahan's unpaid violations. Callahan frowned. What? I held up a thick folder of citations. Over the years, you've racked up quite a few violations. Violations yourself? I flipped through the pages. Illegal modifications to your property, unapproved lawn decorations, parking violations. Oh, and my personal favorite, that fence you built is 2 inches too high. His jaw clenched. That's ridiculous. Oh, I know, I said, but you made these rules, Callahan. I'm just enforcing them. I slapped the folder down on the table. Your total fines come out to about $335,000, payable immediately. His face went ghost white. You can't do this, he stammered. I shrugged. You did to everyone else. Why should you be above the rules? The crowd cheered. Callahan's last stand. I could see Callahan's mind racing. He was cornered, out of options, but he was too much of a narcissist to go down without a fight. I'll sue, he spat. I'll take you to court, and when I win, I'll have this whole neighborhood back under my control. I smiled. Good luck with that. I pulled out one last document, a legal notice. This, I said, is a foreclosure notice. Callahan froze. You see, the HOA isn't the only thing drowning in debt, I continued. Your house, the one you've been living in for years, turns out it was used as collateral for an HOA loan, and since I now own that debt, I tapped the paper. Your house belongs to me. Dead silence. Callahan looked around the room, searching for someone to save him, but no one spoke up, no one defended him, no one cared. He'd spent years making enemies, and now he had no allies left. Callahan's humiliating exit. 2 weeks later, Callahan was officially evicted. His house was put up for auction, and guess what? I bought it. And to make sure he never came back, I turned it into a community clubhouse. The best part? The entire neighborhood threw a party in his front yard to celebrate. I stood on the porch, sipping a cold beer, watching Callahan drive away in a rented U-Haul. He glared at me as he passed, but he didn't say a word, because what could he say? He lost, and the neighborhood was finally free. The sweet victory. With Callahan gone, I made big changes. All bogus fines wiped clean, unnecessary HOA rules gone, homeowners' rights restored. For the first time in years, people actually enjoyed living here. One evening, as I sat on my porch, Mrs. Thompson walked over, smiling. You did a good thing, she said. This place finally feels like home again. I nodded, taking a sip of my drink. Yeah, I said, it does. Then she grinned. So what color are you painting your house next? I smirked. Whatever the hell I want. Callahan was gone. His U-Haul disappearing over the horizon like the final scene of a bad TV villain getting written out of the show. But my work wasn't finished yet, because while removing him was satisfying, true revenge wasn't just about kicking him out. It was about making sure he never, ever crawled his way back. And of course, having a little fun at his expense, transforming Callahan's legacy into a joke. The very next day, I called a neighborhood-wide meeting in the very same HOA clubhouse Callahan had once ruled from. Only this time, there were no bogus fines, no threats, no dict. Nonsense. Just a community finally free from a tyrant. I stood at the front, a grin on my face. All right, folks, we've got a few things to discuss. One guy in the back raised his hand. Can we tear down Callahan's ridiculous fence? The crowd cheered. A woman near the front nodded. And what about all those stupid fines he gave us? I had to pay $200 because my flowers weren't aesthetically uniform. More cheers. I held up my hands. Oh, don't worry, we're fixing all of that. But first, we need a new HOA clubhouse. People murmured in confusion. Someone asked, "Wait, don't we already have a clubhouse?" I smirked. "Oh, we do, but it's about to get a major upgrade." Callahan's house becomes the neighborhood's new party spot. Callahan's former house, the very same house he had used to intimidate, fine, and control everyone, was now community property, and I made sure everyone knew it. We turned the front yard into an open gathering space, the backyard into a community barbecue and picnic area, and the inside into a meeting space, a lounge, and best of all, a place for people to laugh about the man who once ruled them. I even left one of Callahan's old plaques hanging on the wall, but with a new golden plate under it that read, "Here once lived the most hated HOA president of all time. May we never see his kind again." It became an instant running joke in the neighborhood. "Hey, let's meet at the Callahan Center this weekend. Wow, this place looks great. Wonder what Callahan would say. Let's paint the house bright pink in his honor." It was beautiful, and Callahan, well, he hated it. Kicking him while he's down, I thought. I'd seen Callahan at his lowest when he lost the HOA. I was wrong. About 2 weeks after he left, I got a call from my lawyer. Turns out Callahan had made a desperate attempt to appeal the foreclosure. He actually tried to argue that the HOA should forgive his fines because they were unfairly applied. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. This guy had spent years ruining people's lives with these same rules. My lawyer reassured me. "Don't worry." The judge laughed him out of the room. But that's when I got an idea, a petty, brilliant, absolutely evil idea, the job application stunt. I had one of my business contacts look into Callahan's financial situation. It was worse than I thought. He was broke, with no HOA paycheck, no scammed funds, and his house gone. Callahan was now job hunting, and guess who was hiring? I had one of my companies post a job listing for a neighborhood compliance officer. The description: strict enforcement of community guidelines, familiarity with excessive fines, arbitrary rules, and unnecessary paperwork. Must enjoy power trips and pretending to be important. It was obviously a joke, but Callahan applied. I nearly fell out of my chair laughing when I saw his resume come through. The guy was so desperate that he didn't even check who the company was connected to. I set up an interview, and when he walked into the office and saw me sitting across from him, priceless. He went pale, stammered. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. "Oh no, I think you're the perfect candidate. You have plenty of experience finding people for nonsense. Tell me, how do you feel about enforcing no breathing too loudly policies?" His fists clenched. I pretended to think. "Actually, on second thought, we're going in a different direction. But hey, thanks for your application." The absolute humiliation on his face was chef's kiss. Making sure he never comes back, even after all of this, I wanted one final nail in the coffin. So I worked with the HOA board to pass a new permanent neighborhood rule. Any former HOA president who was removed for misconduct is permanently banned from living in this community. We literally wrote Callahan out of existence. When he heard about it, he lost his mind and tried to file another lawsuit, but it didn't even make it to court. The man was officially erased from the neighborhood he once controlled. The ultimate victory. A few months later, the neighborhood threw the biggest block party in years. No HOA restrictions, no pointless rules, just music, barbecue, and people finally enjoying their homes. I stood there watching families laughing, people chatting freely, kids riding bikes on the sidewalks without fear of a fine. It was everything this place should have been from the start. Mrs. Thompson walked up beside me, sipping a lemonade. Never thought I'd see the day, I smiled. Feels good, doesn't it? She nodded. Damn good. Then she smirked. So, what color are you painting your house next? I chuckled, taking a sip of my drink. Whatever the hell I want. The neighborhood had changed. Gone were the days of living under the thumb of a petty tyrant. Homeowners walked their dogs without worrying about unauthorized breeds. Kids rode their bikes on the sidewalks without being fined for excessive play noise. People repainted their houses whatever colors they wanted. And the best part? The HOA actually worked for the people now. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community instead of a dictatorship. And Callahan? Well, he was nothing but a bad memory. But before I could truly call this my ultimate victory, there was one last thing left to do. The new HOA era begins. The first official homeowners meeting after Callahan's removal was something straight out of a movie. People who had once feared speaking up now had opinions. Lots of them. I say we get rid of half these ridiculous rules. Who even cares if someone wants pink shutters? It's their house. We should use the HOA fees to actually improve the neighborhood for once. For the first time, the HOA board actually listened. We went through every rule Callahan had put in place. Finding people for leaving their trash can out 5 minutes too long. Gone. Charging a penalty for having more than 3 lawn decorations. Abolished. Dictating what color people could paint their houses. History. I even added a new policy. Any changes to HOA rules must be voted on by homeowners. No more single-person dictatorship. The vote was unanimous. Callahan's iron grip had officially been erased from history. And then, just to rub a little more salt in the wound, I proposed a new neighborhood tradition, Callahan Appreciation Day. The yearly block party celebrating the day Callahan was removed from power. It would be complete with a barbecue competition because Callahan once tried to ban grilling, a most ridiculous highway violation contest where people submitted the dumbest fines Callahan ever wrote, and a ceremonial firing of the fake violation notices where everyone burned their old highway citations in a fire pit. It was petty, it was hilarious, and it became a neighborhood tradition. Callahan's final pathetic move. I should have known that a man like Callahan wouldn't go down quietly. A few months after his exile, he tried one last time to reclaim his former throne. Word spread that Callahan had bought a house just outside the H's borders. And guess what he did next? He started a blog. Yes, a blog. Highway Justice. The Tyranny of Unregulated Homeowners. It was basically a giant rant about how he had been wrongfully removed and how chaos had taken over the neighborhood in his absence. According to him, I was a dictator worse than he ever was. We had order before he weighed in. In one post, he wrote, "There are garden gnomes everywhere. It's anarchy." I laughed so hard I almost cried. What made it even funnier? Nobody cared. In fact, people in the neighborhood started reading his blog for entertainment. Did you see what Callahan posted today? He's furious about a guy with a flamingo statue. Someone tell him we're putting up inflatable Christmas decorations next week. Hey, let's send him a picture of all the new mailbox colors just to mess with him. Callahan had become a joke. The same man who once ruled this neighborhood with fear was now reduced to yelling into the void. And that was true justice. One evening, while I was relaxing on my porch, Mrs. Thompson came by. She held out a homemade pie for you. She said with a smile, "For everything you did."